Today we're going to be tackling laying down poses once again. That's right, this is a part 2 of the lying down video that you guys might have seen a couple weeks ago, but this one we're going to focus primarily on male poses. Now, I'm not going too far into depth with this one because we covered it pretty extensively in the last video, so go ahead and check that out. But we want to remember when we're looking at lying down poses that I came up with these 6 rules that you can look for to kind of help you analyze your reference a little better and get it down on paper a little more accurately. Now in this video, we're going to jump straight to the figure drawing, but before we do that, since we have a little extra time in this video, I just kind of wanted to showcase where you can get some references. So I found during the process of making these 2 lying down pose videos that there's a lot of free stock images that these really awesome content creators on DeviantArt create that you can use in whatever you want to use for your own art, and also I'm able to use it in order to make videos here for you guys. So it's really cool. I want to kind of give a shout out to them. There's also some other websites like Unsplash where you can go for free stock images as well. And as long as you guys give the credit to the artists that are creating these pictures, such as I am, then you're free to use them. So there you go. All right, and mandatory shout out to warming up. Guys, this is definitely something that's really important when you're doing something new like lying down poses. Some of you are able to talk to you when I heard that you guys were frustrated during those poses, and it's completely understandable because it's new to you. But one of the best ways to kind of get out those early jitters or the stiff drawings or whatever, and you can see me doing some pretty bad stuff here, it's just getting these bad drawings out of the way is warming up. So if you don't have access to any sort of figure drawing videos or something like that, there's so many sites. Look up gesture drawing on Google, whatever you need. You'll be able to find some really cool resources, and you can just turn on for 20 minutes, set them to whatever, 1-minute drawings, 2-minute drawings, and then you're going to go ahead and tackle those to get the bad drawings out of the way. And then hopefully once we get into these drawings, you can kind of get a little smoother, right? So I'm going to use this time also to say I got 5 2-minute drawings coming up. They're going to start right away when they start after this warm up happens. We also got 3 3-minute drawings, and then we're going to finish off with 1 5-minute drawing. And that one's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but I'm going to let you guys have that surprise when it comes. So without further ado, I'm going to finish up my warm up here, and I think we'll get to it. All right, like I said, jumping straight into it. So again, 5 2-minute drawings. This is going to be our first one here. Now with all these drawings, you know, I gave the halfway mark of our lying down pose. If you guys remember my last video, this is very important in finding the right proportions of your lying down pose. Sometimes it will be exactly like if they're standing. Sometimes based on the perspective, it could be totally different. Now with this one, I just want to emphasize that if you can't figure out the shape or you can't figure out each part, just go in and find a big overall shape. So you can kind of see I'm just kind of laying in some structure here because this is kind of a complicated form, especially for 2 minutes. So I don't really have too much time to lay in too much information. So it was better for me to just kind of lay in something, and then now I can kind of come in and make sense of it, right? So you can always come in and edit. That's why we draw light. We draw with some dry materials. You can erase if you need to. I don't really recommend erasing when you have 2 minutes, but hey, if you feel like you can do it, you can do it. But yeah, so going back to our rules, a couple things we're noticing here. We take that halfway. We can see that that halfway is about average. It's about where it normally would be. And then we look to see what is the body doing. Now the pelvis is facing us, but that rib cage is twisting and falling towards the ground, right? So this form is nice and twisted here, where his legs are almost trying to face straight up and his rib cage is trying to face straight down. Obviously not that exaggerated, but that's kind of what is going on within this picture. Now another thing I noticed when I was drawing this is that if you take the size of the head and you move it over, it's about the same size as that remaining part of the arm that is popping out above his head there. So if you are keeping tight to your proportions, that could be something that you look into doing. All right, so moving on to the next one. I do want to apologize that some of these pictures are, I don't know, kind of silly, but it's actually really hard to find lying down male poses for whatever the reason was. Anyways, we have a pretty good pose here, and the figure being almost nude really does help with kind of figuring out how that anatomy works when we're lying down, right? So we get to see a little bit more of some of the landmarks, some of the anatomy, So it really is helpful. Now, this is why I say it's important to find that halfway point. If you guys look here, the halfway point is the mid thigh of that leg going up. And then if we look at that leg that's on the ground, it's just below the crotch line. So it's not super off from our regular proportions here, but because we have that tilted rib cage kind of tilted up and the head is tilting up with it, it actually brought our proportions in a little bit, creating a different halfway line. So this is why I say it's important to find these things. Now, when you're drawing though, you're going to find that you're not always going to be sticking to these proportions necessarily. So it's totally fine to come in and kind of like readjust when you decide that you want to kind of move things. Maybe you feel like your figure is getting too elongated or something. And this could be a problem because you drew the head too small and then the rib cage subsequently became too small, etc., etc. So as you start drawing, always remember that you can change up your proportions to fit whatever you need. Now, I definitely messed this one up a lot. I have a very elongated torso there, and this is because I drew too small at the top half, and then I started drawing really big to kind of fill up those proportion lines I gave myself. So this is why I'm saying, there's pros and cons here, right? It can be something that helps you, and it can also be something that takes away from your drawing. So kind of like look into it that way. All right, same model, similar pose, but pretty different, right? We have a little more of that upward lean of the back, kind of a little more of a lounging pose here than a lying down pose, but still overall a lying down pose. Now again, I want to just say with this one, remember, if your proportions that you lay down at first are not correct, you can always change them, but I do still highly recommend that you start with some sort of lines and then a halfway in between that, just to kind of give you some shape. So I'm stealing angles here. Remember that rule. So I'm coming in, I'm giving myself a little bit of a diagonal plane to put my figure down on, because if I look where his pelvis is making contact with the ground to where the ball of his foot is, that back there, right, the heel, we can see that it's not a straight line. Okay, easy way to say this, his pelvis is higher up on the picture, his foot is a little bit closer to the end of the picture, right? So we want to incorporate that in our work. So you can do that however it helps. An action line could be a good thing here. Coming in and just kind of figuring it out as you go is also an option. That's generally how I do it when I have 2 minutes. I kind of just zoom through it and like get in what I can get in, right? These drawings are not about having super detailed, accurate drawings. I really want to emphasize that you guys just want to figure out the pose. That's it. So just have an essence of what the pose is. If you guys want to come back and pause this video and finish it, go ahead and do that. But I really want you guys to try to finish this within the time zone that's given here in terms of your gesture drawing, and then come back in later and add some detail if you want. So again, if you notice things are getting blocky, indecisive, whatever it is, roll with it, and you're just going to kind of keep going and push yourself through this picture. All right, we have 2 more 2-minute drawings to go. So this one's kind of an interesting pose. Got some interesting stuff going on here, but let's remember overlap, right? We kind of have some things that we can do, and we can use overlap to our advantage. That was the rule. So again, some things here. We only see one arm. That saves us some time. We don't have to draw another arm. We don't have to draw another shoulder, hand, all that stuff. So we're kind of getting off easy there. Now on the leg, he has it bent back on that one that's furthest away from us. That means we only have to draw the top portion of the leg, and we get out of drawing the calf and the ankle, as well as the other foot. So lots of ways that we can save time in this picture. Now, something you want to do is, again, steal and recognize that angle. His foot that we can see, the one that's connected to the leg that is going all the way out, it is not in a straight line with his body. So you want to make sure you recognize that and give yourself room. You're going to see me, I kind of squish mine into the bottom here. I don't think I fit it in towards the end. But that's why I'm kind of giving you guys a tip, because I made the mistake. Make sure you see and steal that angle and you have room at the bottom of your drawing pad or whatever you're drawing in. So you can see here, I started drawing it straight, and then I notice, wait a second, that is not a straight leg. So I gave myself an angle. Now, probably the angle is a little more extreme than that, but I was trying to fit it into the page. And again, I do want to say, it's just like you can change your proportions to how you need them to be. You can also change up some angles. You have some artist liberty here. If you feel like you can get the pose in a certain way, get the pose in. But again, you just want to make sure you're still getting that dynamic of the pose. The leg is on an angle, not straight from the body. It really does enhance and change the pose. All right, last 5 minutes here, and I'm kind of throwing a hardball one at you. So now we have a fully dressed figure. So we have to be able to kind of throw on our X-ray eyes and look through these clothes to kind of see the anatomy. In 2 minutes, I'm not asking for you guys to draw perfectly, identified folds and all this stuff, right? What I'm asking for is just a solid figure that you could then later go into and add to if you wanted to. So when it comes to this one, that knowing that halfway point is very, very important, because there is an extreme perspective going on here. And if you just kind of draw it with your regular proportions, it's going to look really off. It's not going to look like our reference here. Now, what I mean by that is if you take his torso, you can almost take that torso 2 more times down his body. Just the length from, where his neck ends and his belt line begins. And you really want to emphasize that we're seeing the legs, the hips to the feet are the most dominant factor going on in this picture. So really emphasize that. Look for your halfway point, what's going on, and kind of draw through some of those clothes a little bit here. So you can see me kind of figuring it out, thinking about the perspective in my head. So when we think about perspective, we know what's closest to us is bigger, what's farthest from us is smaller. So keeping his head nice and small. And then if you guys need just further proof, right? If you just take your finger and you take the size of that shoe and you bring it up to his head, you can see that shoe is like double the size of his head, right? And I mean, this guy could have big feet, but that is some really big feet if this wasn't in perspective. So again, just try to keep with that idea. You're starting small, you're building bigger, and try not to get too distracted by those clothes. All right, next one. We got 3 minutes on this one, but this one's pretty simple here because we have so little information because of extreme overlap. Now I put 2 halfway points, as you guys can see on our reference there. The halfway point of his wingspan from fingertip to fingertip, because he's got his arms spread wide open. And then of course the halfway point from head to toe, which you guys can see is significantly smaller because we don't see a huge majority of his body. Now, what you want to recognize that's happening here is really, really recognize the overlap in the perspective of we are on the ground with this guy looking at him. That's the perspective of the camera guy. And you want to kind of embody that and think about what is happening. His rib cage is covering the majority of his body. Because we're lying down with him and because his head and his rib cage are taking over, we don't see his stomach, we don't see his hips, we don't see his crotch, we barely see his legs. We see a little bit of that upper thigh in the pants, and then an indication of the ankle in some situations, like the one on the left, we see a little bit more of his leg because of the camera angle. But you guys can see that it's really not that much. So don't let what you know trick you. That's going to be my biggest point here with lying down poses, is you're going to want to draw all this information that isn't there instead of using overlapping to your advantage. So again, when I say use it to your advantage, think about all the information you don't have to draw on this picture and utilize that time to add more detail in to your figure drawing that you can. So again, remember, we're just seeing essentially, if we broke it down, his arms, the top of his head, and we don't even get any facial information because he has a brim of a hat on. We see his rib cage, and then an indication of the legs to know that they're there, and then the shoes. That's it. We're missing so much information here, but not adding that information is showing that information, and if that makes sense. So So I'm just going to draw in my forms here. Again, keep it nice and loose too. You want to make sure you're kind of drawing things a little more shapely and kind of figuring out, you know, like how do you want this to look before you go in and kind of commit to hard angles and details and all that stuff. Because drawing extreme perspectives like this is going to be something that you kind of have to feel out a little bit. Even if you copy the reference exactly, it might look off still because perspective. So you want to kind of come in and understand that, use your creative integrity, figure out what you can and can leave out, and then go from there. I had a little bit extra time after I threw those feet in, so I just kind of started to work on some of the folds. This picture is pretty deceivingly simple, and I want you guys to remember there is extreme perspective going on in here, and it's almost the same perspective as the last picture we just looked at, but the camera is a little higher, or our figure here is on a little bit more of an angle, okay? So we're seeing a little bit more of him, and of course he's arching his back up. So you gotta remember, there's so much information that we're gonna have to lose out on here, so make sure you keep that in mind. You can see right now where I'm at. I'm drawing his butt, his hips section, essentially completely overlapping his ribcage, okay? Because I am so far beneath and below this guy that we're seeing his hip section cover his back, okay? So we're recognizing that. Now next, we're seeing so little of the leg that you really just want to indicate it with a couple round ellipses that kind of show form. What's going to really help here is showing the form of those shorts wrapping around, how you can almost see the full ellipse. You're going more than a full circle here, right? So showing that form is going to help with creating a 3D feeling on this figure. Now again, my tip here is to just kind of throw something in. You can see that my proportions here are a little wonky. But again, that's because I was kind of thinking of the perspective, and then I could always come in and change things up or add things or take things out. But we want to remember that this is just a 3-minute gesture drawing, so we didn't really have too much time. So now I'm coming in and I'm kind of just making things a little bit smaller. Again, with the idea that what is furthest away from me is going to be the smaller part, and what is closest to me is going to be our biggest section. Okay, so now I kind of come in and play with those ellipses, really make things look like they're wrapping around something that I'm looking underneath, right? So that really helps with the perspective plane and the perspective changes going on here. You can add in some of the detail of like the arm if you want, but you could almost get away with not even adding that on this picture. Now, sometimes with extreme perspective like this, it makes more sense to give what is happening in that picture. So I threw in some of that cliff edge, right? It makes a little more sense if you look at this picture to understand that, okay, we're on a cliffside, it's a tilted surface, the guy's laying down, he's facing over the horizon. Whatever information you can give is always going to be helpful to the viewer who is then looking at your work. Now, some of these areas of the picture are pretty dark, right? We don't have, you know, super great lighting here. We're just kind of dealing with the environment. So you got to know your anatomy to kind of figure some of this stuff out. What is overlapping? What do you see going on here? And where do things tend to pop out? All right, you guys sticking with me? You there? You there with me? We got 2 more to go. This is our last 3-minute drawing, and then we're going to pop over to a 5-minute drawing. And I promise you that 5-minute drawing is going to go quick when you see it. But anyways, let's focus here. So with these last 2 drawings, I wanted to show you how you could break down a drawing even more. So I found my proportions of head to toe, halved it, and then halved those halves. So this is going to give me even more accuracy when I am copying a reference photo, right? Or when I'm drawing from a reference photo. So you can see here, usually I go in with the head. But on this one, because I had so much information, I was more confident to go in from the bottom of the hip leading up to that curled over leg. Now I really like this pose because this is just kind of like an interesting laying down pose. I don't know about his choices of places to lay down on, but you know, anyways. So I really like that we got this leg crossed over, you know, it's kind of like this thinking pose, right? And I was able to go in and add so much information before I even got to the head. The head is usually my crutch in life drawing for some reason. I just feel like I can't start drawing a figure without it. But whenever I can feel confident to do that, I do try. So this situation I was able to, and the reason being is because I had enough information. Now I'm kind of stealing angles here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the angle from the bottom of the butt and dragging it over with that line. And then I knew that the foot was a little bit higher than that. So I just drew a line roughly higher than the butt line, and then I drew in the shoe. Now this might not always get you the perfect landing point, but it's going to help with that perspective to show that where his pelvis and his back hit the ground, that foot that is on the other side of his body, right? Because we have that leg that is closest to us, and then the other one is a little bit further away in perspective, should be a little bit higher to show that it is further away in perspective. Okay, so you can come in and of course edit those things. This was a picture where I just felt like there was so much good information. The lighting was so good that I was getting really stuck on the details here. But anyways, trying to jump in and finish it. Really cool point. We have the halfway point at the arms here in the stomach. So that really works out nice and easy to kind of understand where those arms line up. And then of course I'm kind of racing against the clock. I think I saw that I had about 30 seconds here. So I'm going to start drawing in the top of my figure. Remember, I'm just trying to get a decent resemblance of what I have going on here. So we're going to go ahead in there, add our head, and then you can start adding in some of the clothes. The clothes are hiding a lot of the details that we would normally see, like the neck and some of the shoulder detail and all that stuff. So you can really kind of use that to your advantage, hide it. You know, you got plenty of cloth to kind of hide around. And then now we're going to move on to our last pose. Now this is the switch up, guys. It's a 2-person pose. So we want to remember when we're thinking about lying down poses, it's not always going to be singular, right? So we practice female, we just practice male this whole time. Let's throw them together for this last one with a 5-minute pose. Now, to not get you guys confused, the green is the proportions for the male, and the red is the proportions for the female. Now I broke them down into the halves with the halves, okay? But I'm really just going to be using the halves of the male primarily. I'm drawing in some of it right now, and I really wouldn't go this far into depth usually, but I just kind of wanted to show you guys how I would break it down in the picture. You can see this is eating away a lot at the time that I had though, so realistically I probably would have just kind of threw in something rough and jumped in, but I want you guys to see. So the longer lines are my male proportions and the shorter lines are my female proportions, if you guys are getting confused. Anyways, from here we're able to jump in. Now what I want to mention, when you're drawing 2 figures that are close together like this, where one is almost completely overlapping the majority of the other, you're going to draw them together. You're not going to draw one at a time. We're not going to draw in the male and try to figure out all these things that we're not seeing, because that's going to be too much time, too much effort. We're racing against a timer. It's a figure drawing, right? We're doing a gesture drawing. So we have this pose. I'm kind of coming in and figuring out a little bit of the detail of the guy. And then this is really all I can see. Maybe we'll throw in an indication of that arm crossing over. And then from here, I'm just going to kind of start figuring out the torso and placement of the legs for the female, because that's going to be the greatest indicator for the rest of this picture. So I threw in a small indication of the arm here. This allows me to kind of find some details for her. I can see that her shoulder's kind of peeking out right there. I like that design. And then from there, I can kind of come in and figure out around where her rib cage would be. Maybe give a little more detail to the face there. Understand that tilt, right? I like to kind of find placements of things, so I'm kind of coming in and throwing in that arm so that way I don't forget to throw it in later on. And then I'm going to throw in an indication of the body. Now I'm trying to steal those angles. I'm trying to see where she lines up on the halfway point. I'm going to kind of exaggerate some of my curves here. So her rib cage going into her waist, just kind of keep it nice and loose, going for that hourglass shape that we're seeing. I'm just throwing it in like really just long lines, one big curve, right? We can come back and add in all the little bumps and details later if we have time for that. But for this one, we just want to kind of figure it out. So I was able to place in the details of her. And I start to throw in some of the legs. Now, a lot of her feet are kind of hidden, which works for us, right? Use overlapping to our advantage. That's pretty nice. We just have his foot to worry about. So we can come in and find that little indication of that foot that we see on the ground, and then just try to find this angle where it comes towards us and then back to her body, right? Her leg out there on the ground. So you can draw that in. This will kind of get you like a finished shape of what we're looking at. And then what I did is I went to his foot, because from this point on, if I at least have his foot in there, it'll make the whole pose make sense in terms of the fact that it's two figures. I don't want to just have his head and then nothing else of his. So to show that we have two figures lying next to each other, we got to show an indication of something of his. So I came in here and added in the foot. Right, we got a little bit of time left. I'm really just going to see this shape as nice and simple. You can really see his ankles just kind of curving and then getting tucked behind her thigh. And the last indication that I need to kind of make him a little more solid is a little indication of his hips leading into his ribcage area that were kind of getting lost because of her hips there. So drawn in a little indication of what I believe is her foot, but I could be wrong. It actually might be his foot, I think. And there you go, just kind of drawing in a little indication of his body, and then we are going to run out of time on this pose. And we're done. I hope you guys found this video helpful. I know this was a lot of information, and if you haven't tried this before, it was probably a pretty frustrating process, but I promise if you just keep practicing, find your own lying down poses using the sources I gave you guys, you'll get good at it. Please let me know in the comments below how you did, if you guys want more of this stuff. I think next I'm going to jump into some sitting down poses, but if you have ideas for future videos, you can always let me know. Other than that, I just want to say thank you for watching.